a look at modern childhood, we will see that never before have there been so many discourses about children in the fields of psychology, education, philosophy, sociology, art, and human rights. All these domains are concentrating on the topic of childhood and the present situation of children. I am an ordinary practicing clinical psychologist. Let me stress this fact right at the beginning. And Dr. Sára Károly, who has been my teacher, professor, also emphasized that she is just an ordinary psychologist and she dedicated her whole life to the cause of children. So I find it important to combine psychology and law, but I also often participate in other interdisciplinary teams, and my area of interest is how to facilitate understanding between the various professions dealing with children and how all these professional areas can compose an integrated picture for how to care for children. In the morning, we heard a presentation from Beata Basti, a renowned psychiatrist who shared some very important points with us. I will not repeat those points, but let me emphasize from my very practical perspective that we are seeing huge challenges concerning young people. In almost every case, when we have a new patient, we find that they are contemplating self-harm and they have suicidal ideation. And we need a very complex approach. Many of you arrived from abroad, so for you, I would like to emphasize that child pediatric psychiatry is usually provided in the state hospital sector, but there are also private care centers, and one of them is More, and let me cordially welcome the professional managers and leaders of this center who are with us here today. Let me share with you a personal memory. When my younger daughter was around 2 years, you know, she was a toddler, and in every day of the life of a toddler, it happens that they stand up in front of their parents and say, "Lift me up, take me up in your arms." They can throw a tantrum if they want to achieve that, and they can entirely be at a relaxed point and still do so. And there was one case, one instance, which really got deeply ingrained in my mind. My daughter walked up to me and she said these words, "Mommy, lift me up." And there can be different contexts that would trigger a child to do so. Maybe she was hurt. Maybe she doesn't herself understand what's wrong with her. She simply trusts that her loving parents and the adults in her environment will help her find what her problem is. So allow me to start with this metaphor and start walking towards an integrated image of the child. And I will explain in the meantime why we have decided to coin this term. So let us have an experiment now, and let us dissect this image. A child being brought up in love will have the confidence to walk to the parent and ask the parent to lift her up. Look at the image. Allow the image to immerse you. You will realize that if the child walks up to you, that child has already anticipated the fact that he or she will be lifted up, that she sees us as individuals who will be able to do this, and what regards themselves, they have the self-worth. They feel worthy of being lifted up. So a child who is emotionally all right is aware of all these factors in the situation. And, you know, lifting up we can all feel that it also have a second meaning. It is not just a physical instance of being lifted up, but it is also an emotional and even spiritual bond between the parent and the child, and one, of course, the adult lifting up the more vulnerable participant. So this is an image that triggered certain thought processes in our minds, but not only in our minds, by which I mean the members of the Children's Rights Association. Other work groups also started to pay attention to this issue.
So let's look at what the image of the child or the perception of the child came to exist in our culture. What we think in Central Europe about a child, how we relate to it, and how we represent children. This is permeated by our philosophy, history, and religious traditions. And if we made an experiment, and someone actually did it, where they asked adults to say their first association with children, well, they had very interesting, sometimes funny results, because they actually used some very extreme descriptions for children to describe what children are like, just as a matter of first associations. In these associations, we can follow through the European tradition that surrounded the world of children. So let's recall them briefly. You can see from these that they carry some extremes. In the 17th century, philosopher Hobbes thought that children were the evil, they were negative, and they need to grow into humans, and to prevent from mankind to go into chaos and disarray, children need to be disciplined and kept under control. And then the two ensuing trends that still have an impact on our image of the child today came from the philosophy of Locke and Rousseau, who is a contemporary philosopher. So one of them, Locke, had the philosophy tabula rasa and the tabula rasa age, who said that we were all a clean slate, and he thought that it was experience that shaped children, and with the right steering and direction, they would become autonomous adults. However, he already pointed the attention to the fact that childhood is an inevitable stage people have to go through to become adults, but children have a unique type of interest in the world around them that needs to be considered. Rousseau brought in the concept of the innocent child. He says that by nature children are good, they are born to be good, it's environmental impacts that spoil them. And their angelic nature is impacted negatively by social factors. We also heard about the lost childhood in the morning, which is still with us, and they attribute it to Rousseau's age, that it was said that when a child is abused, their childhood and innocence is taken away. So what happened since the three great philosophers? In the 20th century, psychology started representing children as well, and some scientific thinking started about children. They started with psychoanalytics of children, observation of children, experiments, and now we have brain imaging equipment available for research as well. So we entered an era where children can be looked at through scientific means. And as a result, we developed some universalist perceptions about children. So children go through certain stages, and we believe they are universal across the globe. So childhood has been globalized. Here in Europe, Well, we have, for example, Erickson, who created the thesis of normative principles, or Piaget, who was a milestone in cognitive constructivist development and established such development in the context of children. And if that is true, that also means that we have a more standard way of child development and children themselves. But if we have standards, then we also have the concept of problem child. They are the children who cannot be fit into the standard way of thinking. So we get diagnoses about children. And it's actually not my desk, but when I talk to Marty about what to bring to you, well, through the Declaration of Children's Rights in the 20th century, children became legal subjects, which is again another approach concerning children since the 20th century. So all these traditions are enriched by the child we have today, the child we have in mind when we want to help them as helping specialists. Before I get into the meaning of the word integrated and the kind of word groups that are focused on such integrated efforts, I would just make the comment that, well, as I mentioned before, I work in an interdisciplinary work team where we have the impression that we have different definitions of children, whether we are a psychiatrist, a social worker, a teacher. We all see different aspects of the same child. And the integration of all of these different aspects or perceptions becomes the most difficult when you have child abuse cases and the different professions must come together to represent each aspect of the child. In the morning, we heard expressions about the child's welfare, the child's best interest, about situations where the child is a victim. In victimology, we use the expression child is the first, or child crime where the perpetrator is the child. So this all brings in an interdisciplinary approach where we need to have a shared picture of who a child is, whether they are the perpetrator or the victim, or whether they simply go through their parents' divorce or need to decide on where the child would live. So first of all, I'd like to briefly talk about the strategy of human dignity. Well, those involved in this topic also use the perception of the integrated man. Very briefly, I participated in the psychiatric work team. I'd like to mention the name of Maria Rudan, who we remember with much love and who launched this particular project in this specific field on top of her other duties. They tried to create an integrated image by involving actually mental care specialists, priests, healthcare specialists, aid workers. So they started out from the premise that there needs to be a basis upon which we make a recommendation on how to best help an abused child. And they also help to identify the healthy personal boundaries of people and started a way of thinking about these concepts. The integrated image of the man, even though the written document is not published, is defined as follows. It says that vulnerability and fragility is actually part of human nature, and that's particularly true not only for vulnerable adults but also children. being wounded is an avoidable scenario at some point in human life. And in the same way as from the first moment of life, the development of a newborn baby also starts in a relationship. The path of healing also leads through relationships. To use the words of Livian, the face of the other talks to us, and they give them a name, and through this they respect them and they give them a name. So that takes us to a relationship model. The vulnerability and exposure of man is lived through relationships. First, we realize our own thoughts in someone else's statements or confirmation, and our wounded souls are calling for someone else's approving glance or statement. Psychological research can very precisely describe what can happen in the first months and years of life that can lead to injury in the parent-child relationship or the mother-child relationship. So the fragility of life and humans is unavoidable, but people will not always be broken because positively they always reinterpret their lives and experiences. And as we said, that takes place in relationships, whether it's relationships with laymen or professionals. And as part of this strategy, they have the opportunity to go back to the original given unity of the spirit, and we'll come back to that expression. I'd like to mention another work group which currently operates in the United States, who are working on the subject of meta model of the person. They chose it as a working title. Philosophical, psychological, theological aspects are considered by this work group, and they identify premises from their respective fields to define the perception of man. And we see very similar definitions to the strategy of human dignity. This model also says that people are inevitably injured. They must live through some kind of suffering on the platform of human existence, but there are paths to healing both internally and externally. William Norling and Paul Litz, professors working and living in New York, were the people who devised this concept. Mr. Nordling is a child therapist. They identified 11 premises, and they also analyzed specific cases to discuss the best therapy or mental health support strategy. So we got to the integrated image, and it's an opportunity to look at the word integrated, integration, which we also heard on several occasions this morning. So it has a variety of meanings, and I'm sure you know best how many things it can mean in social terms when we are not talking about economic or political integration. I'm a practical specialist, so I'd like to point out this psychological aspect of integration. In psychology, we use the word integration to describe a number of things in personal development. If you know Jung's psychology, then you know that Jung believes well, you know that psychology works with the conscious and the unconscious, and Jung said that integration takes place when certain content is shifted from the unconscious to conscious, and the person processes that content and integrates it into their lives. Again, in the field of psychology, we have another definition, a more general definition of integration, which says that it's bringing together certain opposing factors or values that get to a higher level by being integrated as they find a way of peaceful coexistence. So psychology says that if this integration doesn't take place in the life of a child, there will be major issues if they cannot somehow reconcile all the bad and negative and positive factors that come from their parents, and they cannot say, okay, I know my mother wants the best for me, but she is probably having a bad day and she is angry with me now. So they are not going to live in a black and white world where some people actually are only seen in black and others only in white. And in therapy, we are working on creating this diverse picture that encompasses both. So it's also one meaning of integration. It's an ulterior level of development. And there is actually a definition given by someone else that I'd like to show you. Well, the single whole is in living coexistence, and in that sense it's only living organs that can achieve integration. For humans, integration is a process that encompasses all skills and capabilities in a single life process, which is reducing in stress across time. And when we talk about integration, that out of, well, when I was invited to talk about this, I also checked out the meaning of this word, and I was very surprised by something. I actually don't speak French or Latin, but my smart searches on the internet showed me that there is an original meaning, which means, as we discussed, integration actually means to get back to an original state of wholeness, opportunity. And when I found that, I immediately thought back to my experiences as a psychotherapist. So please allow me to show you a few pictures and share a few thoughts with you. I worked with a number of therapy options. One of them is János Jung's sand therapy method, which is perhaps the most difficult to explain in a meaningful environment, because there are miniatures and figures.
Az instrukciónak a mentén, hogy ami most foglalkoztat téged, azt jelenítsd meg.
Okay, so basically they need to depict the image of this object in the sand. And of course, needless to say that children do it with confidence, and they reflect the operations of their psychological space naturally, and of course it's a protected space. It's within a tray that also gives them a certain level of security. And it's not just a play, there is a significant theory behind it, which Swiss psychologist Dora Kahns developed. There was only a single book written by the author, and practically it says that week by week you can follow in the psychological process what changes in the mind of the patient, and it looks like we know this, the spirit, the mind knows what leads to healing, and we can see that very clearly reflected if we follow the creations of children. And I am actually messing up, stuttering a bit and messing up my message a little bit because I only started working in this field not long ago. But of course, there are children in this therapeutic process, for some children more, for some children less, but at some point most children start using some kind of pure symbol, not necessarily a religious or saintly symbol, but something protective. And they treat it as if it was part of their essence. Something very important that they keep going back to again and again in this process. And then it made me think as to what we see here and what actually happens in their work. A child who grows up in security says, "Mother, please lift me up." They know that they are worthy of being lifted. But damaged children who I meet during therapy, well, have they forgotten about it? No, because they actually show it through symbols. They know that there is this saintly essence to them, which allows them to get on the path of healing. This is what Psychologist says, this is what I say now, but at the same time, please allow me to bring in one quote from the Bible, and then I'll leave it to you whether you carry on these thoughts.
So he says that there are sacred things present from the onset, and these sacred things must be integrated into adulthood. One of the most significant, and certainly to me the most significant message of my presentation, short presentation today, is as follows. We are not in the business of composing theories. Instead, when law and psychology meet, we have to identify what is in the best interest of the children in the form of best practices and what scenes and safe spaces in our specific work for the child to find the path to the original sacredness of his identity. I wonder if what you have been experiencing in the course of your professional work, but I have seen parents posing significant challenges and obstacles to our work when it comes to the right of the children. Parents say, well, it's not only my child who has rights, I also have rights. I have a difficult time coping with such a problematic child. So I have seen these obstacles. So everybody desires to be supported, even the parents do it. And when I conjure up an idealistic picture to the parents, explaining that their child can be saved from every difficulty, from every suffering. And of course, the Children's Rights Convention paints such an ideal picture, and it is indeed too ideal, whether it comes to listening to the child or whatever.
So as a psychiatrist, I can very much see that. And you can also see, if you are surrounded by children, that you cannot interpret a child without the relationship space around them, without understanding the environment they grow up in and the impact that impact them. Well, a child under 10 still very much depends on the perception and views of their parents. So we can see that if we pour it on the child as to what they have right to, well, it does matter whether we create chaos by this or create more order by drawing their attention to their rights and explaining to them what rights they can use. But what is it that helps children organize it in themselves? The fact that they get entitled to certain things. Somehow it's a question on our minds and we don't know the right answers yet, so we are calling upon you to have a joint dialogue in this matter, and we'll find practical ways of doing so. But what came to my mind in this sense is that if a child learns his or her rights. It does matter, it does make a difference as to how they put them in practice. So if they know that they have the right to speak out somewhere, they also need an internal value set that will direct them. They will know that they have the right to speak out against teachers or defend themselves against their peers, but is there some kind of internal structure that would tell them that the other person also has a right? And of course, I don't want to relativize things, but if children don't understand this relationship between the different rights, it can also cause anxiety to children. Because of course we live in relationships and they need to understand that others also have rights that need to be considered. So please don't forget when you work with children that children want us to lift them up. They must believe that they are worthy of it, and they must believe that we are able to lift them up.